So I start from the beginning, but you missed only 2 sentences so far. My first sentence was about thank you for the invitation. My second sentence was about that I got stuck in Athens yesterday night. Sahara sand, suburbs, not so much fun. I think you had more fun. This is the third thing why I pity myself is actually, I love this topic, but I don't love the slot. Now I have the slot behind Shandor's presentation, and you will see, and maybe we can all discuss how I should extract the data, the random fixed model from data I have to present. Frontopolar seizures, let me see how I can move forward. Arrows, I try arrows. Frontal. I try horizontal. Here we go. Okay. So I'd like to start to pick up, to start to focus on frontopolar seizure, maybe with this revised classification on epilepsy, 1989. 1989 is a very famous year for us Germans because of the breakdown of the Berlin Wall. But this is not all what happened, obviously, in 1989. And we have got this proposal of classification of epilepsy syndrome. It's not the current one anymore. But in this proposal, actually, you found a hint, a description of frontopolar seizures. Or seizures arising from the polar seizures. And they back then thought seizures include forced thinking, which is a concept which has been introduced of Penfield back in the 50s. Initial loss of contact, aversive movements, and then possible evolution into other motor areas. And let's see how this survived, or how this concept actually can be survived in the modern concepts, how we try to extract semiology from the frontopolar seizures. This is one of the hurdles you will encounter when you try to identify seizure semiology from the frontopolar region. What is the frontopolar region? Is it the tip? How far back is it? When you come from an anatomical point of view, usually it's Brodmann area 10, which is referred to as the frontopolar cortex. Maybe even there's this 47. You will find this number in one of the studies. That's why I pointed it out. Maybe a little bit of the Brodmann area of 47. This is the anatomical way to look at frontopolar cortex. When you look, and Sylvian is here, I hope he's here, and I'm very thankful to his talk today in the morning about hyperkinetic seizures. When you see, in one of his works, he tried to, pardon? Could you use the pointer? You want me to point? Here you go, yeah, because it's, okay, so I tried to use a pointer. So when you look at just for the guys back in the hall, the anatomical area is this usually, which is referred to the frontopolar area, and here's 47. You will find this number in one of the studies that I pointed out. This may be from an anatomical point of view, the frontopolar cortex. From a practical point of view, in many epilepsy work, or in the few epilepsy works out there, it's not so clear anymore what the frontopolar area is. And for example, from a practical point of view, this is one of the work I will cite. They used a rather kind of looks like arbitrary boundary between the dorsolateral front and the frontopolar, and even there's an overlap. And this is probably important when I try to focus you on the frontopolar region, that there may be in some studies, it's not so clear anymore, what is the orbital frontal cortex and the symptoms and signs arising from the orbital, especially the ventromedial orbital frontal cortex and the frontopolar cortex. So this was one of my problems with this frontopolar region, and you will see how I tried my best. The second thing is, actually, when I took on the topic, I thought, wow, great, I'd love to. I don't know so much, and I'm not so sure about what I should know. So for me, it's an educational process. So I dig into this, and then I've dug, and it didn't come up with something, really, or didn't come up with much, okay? I used these strings we are supposed to do, and I tried to I have to use this one. I tried to include different spellings: seizure, epilepsy, semiology, surgery, EEG, and then I could turn it in, and I left left out some of these terms as well, and I came up only with very, very, very few references, very few, and I reviewed them all. And I reviewed them and checked on the references in these papers, and it didn't increase. It didn't increase, and that's why I picked only one selection criteria. This is only the single one. Whether they have some idea or a convincing idea what is the frontal polar area. Yeah, you find many papers out there combining frontal polar orbitofrontal cortex. There are many papers out there combining dorsolateral and frontal polar areas. But this is not why we are here. Okay, we are not here to discuss the frontal lobe. We are here to discuss subfields. So I try to be strict. Maybe I overdid it, and please, you can blame me in the discussion and say, go back and do this work again and make a better job. It's fine, it's fine. I'm used to it back home as well. So, I have 65 papers. I reviewed them all. I included 16 papers with thought they have made a distinction: dorsolateral, frontal, orbitofrontal, frontopolar. Yeah? And in the end, I could only extract meaningful information from 4 papers. How many patients they included? I don't know. You will see. You tell me. You tell me. These are the 4 papers. Yeah? And you probably have seen them before. Okay. One study from Milano. Congrats to the study. One study from Marseille. Congrats to this study. And all the other ones as well, congrats. But for this topic, talking about frontopolar seizures or semiology, it was not. The first 2 were for me more helpful. And one of the reasons why there have been, and we discussed this topic just a minute before, is that they made some distinction. They gave some idea about semiology starting in the beginning of the seizure and some semiology occurring during the course of the seizure. And they combined it with the seizure onset zone or with the time, with the ictal invasion. Here, the Marseille study, you will see they looked at the ictal discharges and the time point where the ictal discharges were during the course of the seizure. So they gave some impression whether this actually the location, which is usually the seizure onset zone, frontopolar, and the semiology occurred at the same time during the seizure, which is important in my respect. Then the other thing is, however, 3 of the studies, I point them out here, focused on motor seizure. 2 of them explicitly on hyperkinetic hypermotor seizures and 1 on motor seizure. So there's already a bias in these 3 studies. Maybe they missed, by inclusion criteria, non-motor signs, symptoms from the frontopolar region, because they really did not include these patients because they maybe ended up with a non-motor seizure, whatever this is. Okay, so this is the second hurdle a big hurdle I encountered. So let's go and focus on this paper. This is the paper from Milano. And they included 74 papers. They looked actually for hypermotor, the inclusion criteria were hypermotor, hyperkinetic seizures, and they predefined 4 semiological patterns. Not arbitrarily, they looked at the evidence they had, and they thought we can define 4 patterns. And here they give the seizure onset zone, which is a combination of all the clinical information they had. Okay, and I think they're pretty confident. They know what they're doing, obviously, and for sure. But this is a combination. On some had, I can go back. All of them had surgery, and only maybe a little, 2/3 had an invasive EEG. Okay. Oh, sorry, wrong direction. So they defined 4 semiological patterns, and especially the semiological pattern 4 clustered in the frontopolar region. Okay, and when you look and when you remember one thing of this talk, it's not me. You can forget about me. You should maybe on this description, which probably fits well what happens in the frontopolar region, a gastro behavior with high emotional content. Okay. Oh, sorry. I have to go to the pointer. Thank you for reminding me. Here we go. I go back. I take my time. Okay, so gastro behavior with high emotional content. This clustered, in the frontopolar region. What did they? What did the group thought? What this means? Integrated gastro behavior. And this is another thing I will point out, integrated gastro behavior. The other paper will call it naturalistic behavior, as compared to what the other group called anarchic behavior. So it's something meaningful, semi-meaningful things, what they do, and they attach to this area negative emotional effects, fear, anxiety. And when I looked at and tried to separate frontopolar area to the frontal orbital area, there might be this overlap. Fear is probably, this. I don't know whether you talked about this temporopolar insular orbitofrontal pathway. So maybe there's this overlap I showed you in the beginning of the talk. Okay, and we have a look at the video in a minute. A speech production was one striking feature in this area. This, when we look at hyperkinetic, like they defined kicking, rocking, paddling, stereotypes, manipulation, utilization, it was more widespread, but including also some seizure onset zones in the frontopolar area. Let's look at the other one, and this is aggregated data. So I look at Chandor, This aggregate, they don't give any numbers. This is a principal component analysis. I think it's a very nice way to do this, but I cannot extract anything of them. What they did, they looked 45 frontal lobe patients, and they scored, this was the one study which also scored for non-motor signs. There are 31 semiological items, and they rated it absent, there in the beginning, there somewhere during the course of the seizure. In addition, and I go back 2 slides, they had 100% SEEG, and this was their validation. They looked at the EEG discharge, where it was in the beginning and then where it spread. Okay, so, and they rated this discharge as well. At the beginning, low voltage fast, actually what they looked at. Yeah, and then whether this electrode was low voltage fast in the beginning, there was no discharge whatsoever, or whether there was discharge somewhere during the course of the seizure. And then they had these 2 rating systems, and they did a PCA, a principal component analysis. And this is what they came up with. So they tried to correlate the symptom, the sign, with the ictal discharge. And then this, I think, has for me is the most valid way to do this. Okay. And here you again, what I point out, here's the area Brodmann 10, and here's the area Brodmann 47, Brodmann area. And you see, they have basically, and this is actually the features extracted from this calculation, which happened were more likely to happen when the ictal discharge is in this area frontopolarly. So it was again emotion. And you see here, there's a positive emotion. You will see the seizure I show. Listen to it's in German. Sorry, it was a German. I didn't find an international patient in my ward. And you look at the tone, and he was more in good spirits. You will see it. He was not in a fear, anger, anxious way. He was more in in good spirits. You will see. You will hear, hopefully, if the sounds are working. They found emotional, positive emotion, but also, and the start squares are the significant squares, okay, from the principal component. But they found this, the negative feeling, but also the positive feelings. They found speech in production. And they found, again, these integrated gastromotor behavior, so something semi-purposeful, purposeful things, as compared to more dorsolateral, where the hyperkinetic movements may become more, what Bonini, for instance, Bonini called it anarchic, yeah, more not so purposeful. Okay, and one striking thing is that in all these studies, the site of the epilepsy didn't play much of a role. They probably plays a role, I don't know, but they don't give the information. Okay? So that's why when you talk about, this may, I don't know, it's a hypothetical question I ask you, is the lack of information on the side of the lobe involved, does it play a role with impairment of consciousness? I didn't find the information in the Milano work. Here, they gave it as a significant association with frontal polar discharges. However, still I couldn't find the side, whether it's right or left, or whether it matters at all. I don't know. Let's look at the smaller work. Here, we had 4 patients. We had, I think I'm pretty confident there's at least 1 patient in this work has a frontal polar onset. Again, these are work which did not so well in my eyes. They didn't focus on propagation. They focused on motor signs, hyperkinetic signs during the seizure. And they said when the seizure onset zone was in the frontal polar area, they called it hyperkinetic automatisms or hyperkinetic behavior, mild agitation, and a loss of consciousness. It was a left frontal polar seizure onset zone. So let's look at one of the seizures and see which is one of the few examples. I know it's a rare. I think it's a rare condition that we can examine, study such a epilepsy in detail. This is a study. He had a dysplasia in the frontal pole, and the seizure is coming right from this area. This 13-year-old gentleman, and I subtitled it, and you will see. It's a seizure where I'm done with here. I subtitled it because.
Ich bin kein Monster, ich bin der Mond. Mensch, mein Himmel auf dem Mond ist weg. Das bin ich bin ein Mond.
Engel?
Anwesend.
Alles in Ordnung.
Aber sowas von. Und bei euch?
Können Sie sich mal ein Wort merken?
He's not anxious.
Ein Baum, okay. Ich glaube, das kann ich mir gerade noch so merken.
Jetzt heben Sie mal den rechten Arm. Okay, und zählen von 1 bis 10.
1 bis 10, okay. Ich zeige ja schon.
Bitte mal einmal zählen von 1 bis 10.
Now he loses awareness. You hear some lip smacking. But it's in the end of the seizure. You see, he was a rather good spirit. He's not in fear, in my eyes, He was a jokey person anyway, I love to have him in. We had him 3 times in. It was always fun to work with him, during the seizure and without. Okay, anyway, so you see speech production, you see good spirits. You see, in the beginning, he was aware, obviously, He had some semi-purposeful, he was waving rather as the queen did. Okay. So, summarizing, I'm done with my time. Okay, so what do we have here? I think we have an eloquent area, but we have very, very significant limitations to be really confident, or high confident, what we are talking about. What are the limitations? We have. I could find. And this actually I tried at least for 30 minutes. I tried to find the studies. Actually, it took much longer than 30 minutes. Yeah, I found only few studies, or very few studies with few patients. And the main hurdle was that it was in many studies there was not a clear separation of the frontopolar region. I know it's tough because by definition there's no really good signs from the imaging where to stop, where to begin. Okay, and I think and when we talk about the region, I think the propagation pattern, when we really want to talk it into detail and know what the frontopolar is doing and what the dorsolateral cortex is doing, then we need to focus as well on the discharge, whether it's there right now or it's propagated somewhere else. Okay, I was surprised that I didn't find very much information on the site. So that's why I leave it open about impairment of consciousness, aware or unaware. And with these few patients, I could not differentiate adults of children, and in some of the papers, they didn't give the information. So what do we have? I think we do have an idea and hypothesis what happens in the frontopolar area if there is an ictal discharge in it. And it's probably you have some integrated gastrohyperkinetic behavior. It should be naturally, it should be semi-purposeful, okay? Not anarchic, how the Marseille group put it, okay? You have emotions with it. And I believe, by this hypothesis, you have maybe a dorsal ventral gradient, the more you come to the orbitofrontal area, the more the emotion's got to be negative. And maybe more dorsally, you have the positive. But it's a complete hypothesis. But you do have emotions elicited by discharge in this area. And you probably have speech production. Or no, you're likely to have both studies showed this similarly, that we have speech production there, and you see this in the video. It's N1. Okay, and is this forced thinking already? Forced thinking was defined as an intrusion of thoughts or words or some urge to do something, an intrusion which is not stoppable. I leave it open for discussion. And then, obviously, where should it spread? There's going to be a rostrocaudal propagation, dorsolateral, orbitofrontal, and anterior cingulate. Okay, very frequently to the orbitofrontal cortex because there's anyway a difficult delineation, and to dorsolateral. But again, this is not kind of the core of this, what I wanted to show today. And thank you for your attention.